Hi, I'm Edward, and welcome to Marxists at the Movies. I'm proud to introduce this project, created with the help of my AI team. You won't be hearing my voice just yet. Instead, two AI hosts will guide you through the stories, struggles, and revolutionary sparks hidden in the films we know and love. Thanks for being here, and enjoy the show.
This is the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low. The cinema whispers where truths can grow. From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Tonight, Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name.
All right, comrades, welcome back to Marxists at the Movies.
Your favorite deep dive into cinema.
Through a decidedly red lens, yes. We're your hosts, ready to dissect another flick for your proletarian pleasure.
Absolutely.
And just a quick heads up, if you haven't seen Dolores Claiborne, the 1995 one, maybe brace yourself. Or come back later, because there will be spoilers.
Definitely spoilers. You've been warned.
Okay, so May rolls on, which means we're still celebrating International Workers' Month.
Indeed.
And, you know, what better film to dig into than one that, well, on the surface, it might seem like just a thriller, maybe a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath, it is absolutely seething with class struggle and the really brutal realities of being a working class woman in that kind of society.
Yeah, exactly. Today we're plunging into Taylor Hackford's Dolores Claiborne, and of course, Kathy Bates giving just a powerhouse performance.
Oh, incredible.
And for our analysis today, our main guide, our sort of foundational text, is going to be that really insightful article, Dolores Claiborne, Sometimes, which was penned by one of our own, Edward Michael Francis.
That's right. A fantastic piece.
It really is. But we're not stopping there, are we?
No. To really get the full picture, we're pulling in quite a bit more.
We need the context. So we've got Dave Musson's YouTube review. You know, Dave Reed's King. He's got some great takes.
Very enthusiastic, yeah.
The IMDb page, obviously, for all the facts and figures.
I could do without IMDb.
Roger Ebert's original review, always worth reading Ebert.
Always.
And those key scenes you can find floating around YouTube, you know, Dolores and Joe during the eclipse.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful.
Oh, yeah, that scene.
And Dolores meeting Vera Donovan for the first time. Classic.
The rules scene.
Plus the bank scene clip, the hit scene clip.
Essential moments.
And we've also got those interviews with Jennifer Jason Leigh and Kathy Bates from the Bobby Wigan Archive. Those are real gems.
Yeah, hearing from the actors themselves is always illuminating.
Definitely. And finally, just to keep everything straight, that overview, Little Tall Island Secrets and Dolores Claiborne, helps with the timeline, you know?
Right. Keeps the past and present sorted. So our mission today, comrades, and look, you're listening, so you've basically accepted it.
You're in,
is to really, really unpack Dolores Claiborne. We're talking the plot, obviously, the characters who are just wonderfully complex.
So complex.
The actors, how they brought them to life. Some juicy trivia, always good.
Always fun.
A little peek behind the curtain at the production history. We'll touch on awards, or maybe the lack thereof, which is kind of surprising given how much Kathy Bates herself loves this role, according to IMDb in her interview.
Yeah, that is surprising. She calls it her favorite.
Right. And of course, the acting itself, just phenomenal across the board. But the main lens, the main focus for us naturally is going to be that Marxist feminist perspective that Francis lays out so well in his article. We really want to dig down, excavate the film's deeper insights. What it's saying about class, about labor, especially undervalued labor, and about those ever-present suffocating patriarchal structures.
That's the goal. Uncover those layers.
Okay, so let's start there. Initial reactions. Why does this film, which is so good, still feel kind of underrated. Like, it flies under the radar for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a really good question to kick off with. Dave Meeson, in his review, he calls it an underrated gem, straight up.
He does.
And he really emphasizes how compelling it is. Calls it a crackerjack of a movie, a truly wonderful adaptation of the King novel.
High praise.
Very high. And interestingly, he points out it was kind of a sleeper hit.
Ah, right. Word of mouth.
Exactly. It didn't explode, but it built its reputation over time, which suggests, maybe it didn't grab everyone immediately, but it really stuck with those who saw it.
Yeah, it lingers.
It does. And perhaps, like Ebert sort of touches on, the lack of overt supernatural stuff.
Right. No clowns, no ghosts.
Exactly. Maybe that makes it less instantly recognizable as a Stephen King movie for some people.
Could be. People expect something different, maybe.
Possibly. And so maybe some genre fans just overlooked it. Ebert himself says, the film really works because of the human drama, not supernatural elements.
Which is true. The horror is very, very real world.
Precisely. And maybe that differentiation, that lack of monsters or big scares, meant some horror fans just passed it by, missing the much more subtle, but I'd argue just as impactful suspense and dread that's rooted in the characters' actual lives.
Psychological horror, social horror even.
Yes. So this sort of under-the-radar status, despite these incredible performances and this really gripping story, it actually makes it perfect for a deep dive like ours.
Yeah, let's bring it out into the light.
Let's really put that spotlight on its brilliance, especially using the critical lens that Francis gives us.
Okay. Yeah, it definitely lacks the jump scares of, say, It, or even the intense claustrophobia of Misery, despite Bates returning to King's world.
Right, different kind of tension.
But like you said, that's what makes it so powerful, isn't it? The horror here is grounded. It's in the systems, it's in the relationships, it's human.
Systemic, yeah.
Okay, so for anyone listening who maybe hasn't seen it, go watch it, obviously, but let's give a quick rundown of the main story. What actually happens? What brings Selina back to Little Tall Island after all that time?
Right, the setup. So the plot basically kicks off, like our sources lay out, with Dolores Claiborne. She's a working-class housekeeper living on this pretty isolated island, Little Tall, off the coast of Maine.
Classic King setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's suddenly accused of murdering her employer, this wealthy, elderly woman named Vera Donovan.
Who she's worked for decades.
Yeah, years and years. So this accusation sends, shockwaves through the small community. And crucially, it brings Dolores's estranged daughter, Selina St. George, back home.
Estranged is the key word there.
Very key. Selina's now a successful magazine writer in New York City. Hasn't been back in like 15 years.
Wow, that time.
Yeah. So Selina's return isn't just about the current crisis with Vera. It immediately starts dredging up all these long-buried secrets from their past.
The family skeletons.
Big time. Most importantly, the really mysterious death of Dolores's abusive husband, Selina's father, Joe St. George, which happened many, many years before.
During that eclipse.
During the eclipse, exactly. So you've got this dual mystery structure unfolding. Did Dolores kill Vera now? And what really happened to Joe back then?
And the film weaves those two timelines together really skillfully.
Masterfully, yeah. Using flashbacks to give context for the present, gradually revealing the incredibly complicated history between Dolores, Selina, Joe, and even Vera.
Right.
So the tension isn't just, a simple whodunit for either death. It's also coming from this huge emotional gap between Dolores and Selina.
Yeah, that relationship is core.
And their struggle to reconcile their very different memories and perspectives on what happened. Plus, the island itself, Little Tall, it feels like a character, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So isolated, claustrophobic in its own way.
Exactly. It adds to that feeling of secrets just simmering under the surface, these long-held grudges in that small town.
Mm-hmm.
So this intricate structure, shifting back and forth in time, it really allows for that deeper look at why the characters do what they do, the societal forces that shape them, which of course makes it perfect ground for the kind of Marxist feminist analysis we're doing today.
Absolutely. And that brings us right back to Francis's article. He gives us that framework, that Marxist feminist lens to see it through. And he makes a pretty bold claim, right? He says Dolores Claiborne, seen this way, isn't just a thriller. It's, quote, a revolutionary cry from the underclass of womanhood.
It's a powerful statement.
It really is. So what's the core of that? How does that famous line, sometimes being a bitch is all a woman has to hold on to, function as more than just, a punchy piece of dialogue?
Right. Francis argues that line is basically the film's thesis statement. He says it perfectly encapsulates what the film is exploring. women's rage, their desperate fight for survival within these really oppressive systems, and how class conditions fundamentally shape all of that.
So it's not just about being mean.
Not at all. It's not about celebrating unpleasantness for its own sake. It's about recognizing that in a world that's basically designed to disempower women, especially working class women, sometimes adopting what society labels a bitchy attitude becomes, well, it becomes a necessary defense mechanism.
A shield.
A shield, exactly. A tool for self-preservation when, frankly, all the other doors are closed to you.
Right.
So this reading really pushes us, to look past just individual personality flaws or traits and to see these behaviors as direct responses to systemic inequality.
Which is central to a Marxist feminist approach.
Precisely. Francis really digs into how society expects women to behave, right? Docile, agreeable.
Yeah, don't make waves.
Don't make waves. And how assertiveness in women, particularly women from marginalized backgrounds, gets punished. The label bitch is thrown around to put women down if they step out of line.
Absolutely.
But here, in the film's context and through Francis's analysis, that word gets reclaimed. It becomes a form of resistance, a way for women like Dolores, and maybe even Vera in her own way, to exert some kind of agency when faced with these huge power imbalances.
So it connects to that broader idea of how power structures, class, and gender influence how people act and interact.
Exactly. It connects directly to Marxist feminist thought. The line becomes this really potent symbol of defiance. Defiance against patriarchal control, yes, but also defiance against those sort of condescending attitudes that are so often aimed at working class women.
Okay, let's unpack that even more by looking specifically at Dolores through this lens. Francis calls her a hyper-exploited worker, performing undervalued reproductive labor. What does that mean in practice, in her daily life in the film?
Well, if you just look at what she does all day.
It's constant work.
It's constant. It's relentless, and it's largely unseen and definitely unacknowledged labor. For Vera, she's the housekeeper. She maintains the physical space, right? But she has to adhere to Vera's incredibly exacting, almost obsessive demands.
6 clothespins, not 5.
Yeah.
Even in winter.
Exactly. Ebert highlights that line, and you see it in that first meeting scene, the YouTube clip, where Vera lays out all the rules for cleaning. It's meticulous. That is reproductive labor in its purest sense. Maintaining the household, making sure her employer is comfortable, her well-being is taken care of. But as Francis points out, Dolores gets no real social capital from this, no power.
Her work is essential for Vera's life, but she stays subordinate.
Completely subordinate. Her own needs ignored. And at the same time, she's trapped at home with Joe, where her labor is also exploited. And not just exploited, her actual earnings are stolen from her.
Which we see in that devastating bank scene.
Exactly. And on top of all that, her role as a wife and mother involves huge amounts of unpaid labor, too. So she's being hyper-exploited, as Francis says, in both the private sphere, at home, and the public sphere, working for Vera.
And this kind of labor, the traditionally female work?
It's systematically devalued, right? Under capitalism, under patriarchy. Cleaning, cooking, caring for people, it's not seen as productive in the same way as, say, factory work or office work.
Even though society can't function without it.
Exactly. It's fundamental, but it's rendered invisible. And the film, through Dolores, just puts this front and center. It shows the material reality of her economic entrapment, her complete lack of social mobility.
Yeah, that bank scene. Let's talk specifics there. The clip, Kathy Bates in Dolores Claiborne, the bank scene. She goes in, confronts the manager, Mr. Peace, Bob Gunton, a.k.a. the warden from Shawshank.
Ah, right. Nice little connection there.
Because she finds out Joe has just closed her account, wiped out her savings. How does that scene just perfectly illustrate the entrapment and powerlessness Francis is talking about?
Oh, it's brutal. It's a perfect storm of vulnerability. Dolores argues, completely correctly and passionately, that the money was hers. She earned it, scraping it together over years of backbreaking work for Vera.
Saving for Selena.
Saving for Selena's future. But because it was a custodial account, technically Joe's name was on it too. The bank, following what Mr. Peace coldly calls standard bank practice.
Ugh, that phrase.
Right. They let Joe just take it all, without even calling Dolores.
No courtesy, no check, nothing.
Nothing. And her outrage, her desperation, who the hell you think put the money in the bank to begin with? It just bounces off this wall of cold, bureaucratic indifference.
The institution protects the man.
Exactly. The bank, which is supposed to offer some kind of security, actually reinforces her powerlessness. And Francis argues, this isn't just one bad bank manager being sexist.
It's systemic.
It's reflective of these broader societal structures that just inherently prioritize male control over money and completely dismiss the economic contributions and leads of working-class women. Her line, "It's because I'm a woman, ain't it?" It just hangs there with this awful, bitter truth.
Yeah.
Frances really emphasizes how financial institutions operating under these patriarchal norms just perpetuate economic inequality. The bank refuses to see her legitimate claim to her own earnings. It underscores how the legal system, the economic system, they favor male ownership, male control.
It's not just a personal tragedy for her.
No, it's a systemic indictment, and her lack of social capital, being a working-class woman on this remote island, means she has no power to fight it. She's isolated. It just powerfully shows how individual injustice is so often rooted in these bigger power structures. That's a key Marxist feminist point, right?
Absolutely. And that financial vulnerability, that theft, is a huge part of why she's trapped with Joe. He doesn't just hit her. He controls her money, her means of escape. Now, Francis has this really interesting take on Joe. He doesn't just see him as, one evil guy. He sees him as a symbol of, quote, patriarchal terror embedded in working class life. What does he mean by that? How does Joe represent something bigger?
That's such a crucial insight from Francis. Joe's abuse isn't presented as some kind of random, isolated act of pure evil by one bad apple.
Right. It feels structural.
Exactly. It's shown as a manifestation of a patriarchal system, a system that basically grants men power and control within the home, within the family. And often, Francis argues, this is actually made worse by the stresses and strains of working-class life, the economic precarity. We see it so clearly in that horrible hit scene clip on YouTube. Joe's language is aggressive, it's demeaning, his physical violence, slapping her, grabbing her. It's all about asserting his dominance, his feeling of ownership over her.
Owning her body, her labor, her money.
Everything.
Yeah.
And Kathy Bates, in her interview, she talks about how hard it was to play Dolores, right? And part of that was understanding the history, the context of that kind of abuse. It wasn't just about playing angry. It was about embodying the reality of being subjected to that kind of patriarchal violence over years.
Yeah, the weight of it.
The weight of it. Francis suggests that in working class communities where money is tight and pressures are high, these traditional patriarchal ideas can become even more entrenched, which makes women like Dolores even more vulnerable.
Right.
Joe's sense of entitlement, his belief that he just has the right to control her life, her finances, the film doesn't paint that as unique to him. It feels reflective of broader social norms that just privilege male authority in the family unit.
And the film doesn't flinch from showing how brutal that is.
Not at all. It shows the raw impact, not just on Dolores, but on Selena too, how it shapes their entire lives, their relationship for decades. Joe's actions become this concrete example of how systemic power imbalances play out right inside the home, showing that intersection of class and gender in creating and perpetuating oppression.
And it's not just Dolores suffering his terror, is it? The film eventually reveals the absolutely horrific abuse that Selena also endured from him.
Yes, which makes that confrontation during the eclipse even more complex and harrowing.
Right, that pivotal scene.
Yeah.
You see it in the YouTube clip. Dolores confronts Joe, he makes those vile threats about Selena, and then he falls down the well. Now, Francis has a really radical take on this moment. He doesn't see Dolores causing Joe's death as like a moment of temporary insanity or something.
No.
He calls it a rational, even revolutionary response to material and patriarchal oppression, an act of class survival, a rejection of male ownership. That's a strong interpretation.
It is strong, it is radical, but when you really think about the situation Dolores is in, the complete lack of any other way out, it becomes incredibly compelling.
She has no recourse.
None. The bank scene showed her financial independence being stolen. Her attempts to protect Selena earlier were met with threats and violence from Joe. Society, the law, they offer her absolutely no escape from his tyranny.
She's cornered.
Completely cornered. And in that eclipse scene, we see the absolute culmination of his abuse, especially those horrifying threats about Selena.
Yep.
In that moment, as the world literally goes dark, she acts decisively. Francis argues, look, this isn't just a crime of passion, impulsive rage. It's calculated. It's self-preservation, yes, but even more critically, it's about protecting her daughter from suffering further abuse at his hands.
An act of maternal protection taken to the extreme.
Exactly. It's an act born out of total systemic failure, a forceful, violent rejection of Joe's claim of ownership over their lives. And it starkly illustrates Vera's later advice, doesn't it? Sometimes being a bitch, meaning, in this context, being fiercely defiant, willing to break the rules, to transgress, is the only way to survive.
Because the system offers no other way.
Precisely. Francis really highlights those social and economic constraints. the legal system, useless to her against Joe. Her economic dependence traps her further. So in that context, her actions become, a form of radical self-defense, a violent shattering of the chains of patriarchal oppression.
The personal and the political just colliding violently.
Yes. She takes control, finally, in the face of total systemic injustice. And that interpretation fits right in with Marxist feminist ideas about how marginalized groups sometimes have to resort to, well, unconventional, even transgressive actions when they're facing insurmountable oppression and have zero institutional support.
Okay. This connects directly to Selena then. Frances talks about how Selena's upward mobility, her escape to New York, led to repressed memories and even a kind of disdain for her working-class mother. How does the film show this class tension between mother and daughter? And how does Jennifer Jason Leigh capture Selena's side of it?
Well, Dave Musson describes Selena when she comes back as dark, distant, cynical, bitter, broken.
Yeah, that sums her up initially, like a 90s grunge icon, as Musson says.
Totally. And Jennifer Jason Leigh just embodies that perfectly. Selena has escaped Little Tall Island. She's escaped the perceived shame of her working class background. She's built this successful career in the city.
Achieve the middle class dream, sort of.
Right. But the cost of that upward climb seems to be burying the trauma she went through and maybe distancing herself from the realities of her mother's life and struggle.
So she looks down on Dolores.
Initially, yeah. She comes back full of suspicion, resentment. Maybe she even half believes the town gossip about Dolores killing her father. Frances argues that Selena has, maybe unconsciously, absorbed some of that bourgeois viewpoint, that working-class women are somehow inherently flawed or, responsible for their own problems.
Victim blaming, essentially.
Yeah. Her drive for upward mobility made her distance herself from her roots, maybe internalize some negative stereotypes about her own class background. Her job as a journalist, too, that carries a certain social and intellectual capital, right?
Yeah.
Which further highlights that class divide between her and Dolores.
Mm-hmm.
So her first interactions with her mother are just full of judgment, this real reluctance to actually listen to her mother's story, to engage with it.
And Leigh's performance captures that internal conflict.
Brilliantly. You see the layers of pain, the resentment, all hidden under that cynical, brittle surface. Her body language is so guarded, her expressions are closed off, her tone is often sharp, accusatory. It all paints this picture of a woman just struggling intensely to reconcile her past and her present.
And what about her journey? Frances talks about that final scene, that silent look between them on the ferry, as a moment of solidarity over shame. How does Selena get there? How does she change? And does Leigh's interview give us any insight into that?
Yeah, her transformation is really the emotional core of the film alongside Dolores' story. It's gradual, it's painful, it's triggered by those repressed memories starting to surface, memories of Joe's abuse, specifically towards her.
The penny drops about her father.
Exactly. And as she starts piecing together the truth, not just about Joe, but also about what really happened with Vera in her final days, she starts to see her mother differently, not as this difficult, maybe monstrous woman she remembered or constructed,
but as a survivor.
As a survivor who made these absolutely unimaginable sacrifices for her. And that final glance on the ferry, Frances nails it. It's silent, but it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. So much conveyed without words.
It's that moment of deep understanding, acceptance. Selena finally sheds that shame she's carried for so long. She acknowledges the shared struggle, the shared trauma they both endured because of Joe's violence and because of their class position. Mm-hmm. And in her interview, Jennifer Jason Leigh talks about how playing a journalist can be totally consuming. She draws this parallel to the kind of deep dive needed to really get inside Selena's head.
Right, the immersion.
The immersion, yeah. Which suggests she really engaged with Selena's internal world, that repressed trauma, and that slow, dawning awakening to her mother's truth. It's a really hard-won connection between them, transcending words, transcending societal judgment.
And Frances argues this isn't just personal healing for Selena.
No, he sees it as a form of class consciousness raising, too. Mm-hmm. She comes to recognize the systemic forces, patriarchy, class oppression that shaped not just her mother's life, but her own as well.
So her initial desire to escape her background gets replaced
by solidarity. By recognizing the strength, the resilience of the working class woman who raised her. It's this arc about the potential for intergenerational healing, breaking down those class barriers through empathy, through shared understanding. It's very powerful.
Okay, let's pivot to the other towering female figure in the film, Vera Donovan, played so brilliantly by Judy Parfitt. Frances sees her as really complex. Yes, she represents the upper class, the employer.
The bourgeoisie, in a sense.
Right. But she's also a woman who learned her own ways to survive patriarchy. And that famous line against sometimes, Dolores, sometimes you had to be a high-riding bitch to survive. Sometimes being a bitch is all a woman has to hang on to. It's everywhere. Ebert quotes it. IMDb highlights it. Francis builds on it. It's even a YouTube clip title. Francis argues this isn't just Vera being cruel. It's a recognition of survival. Can you unpack that interpretation?
Yeah, it's crucial not to just dismiss Vera as the mean rich lady. Francis argues that despite her wealth, her social position, she's not immune to the constraints of patriarchy.
She faced her own struggles.
Likely, yes. Francis hints maybe she also dealt with an abusive husband. We don't know for sure, but the implication is there. So that line, delivered with such icy conviction by Parfit, it's not about being nasty just because she can.
It's pragmatic.
It's pragmatic, yeah. Maybe cynical, but pragmatic. It's an acknowledgement of the really limited options women had, maybe still have regardless of class, when they're navigating a world run by men.
Okay.
For Vera, her wealth, her social power allowed her to be a high-riding bitch. She could exert control in her own sphere, be demanding, be difficult.
Because she had the resources to back it up.
Exactly. And she's recognizing that Dolores, who lacks those privileges, might need to adopt a different kind of bitchiness, maybe more defensive, maybe more overtly tough, just to protect herself.
So it's acknowledging different tools for survival based on class.
Precisely. Francis points out Vera's bitchiness comes from her class power. It lets her be uncompromising in a way Dolores probably couldn't be without facing huge backlash, socially and economically.
Right. Dolores would just be seen as difficult or insubordinate.
Right. Probably fired. Or worse. But underneath that class difference, Francis suggests, there's this shared understanding about the need for women to adopt certain strategies, even unpleasant ones, to get by in a man's world. Vera's advice isn't just personal. It reflects that broader reality where women often have to be really assertive, maybe even aggressive, just to be heard, to protect themselves from being exploited or abused.
And we see that dynamic right from their first meeting in that scene available on YouTube. Vera laying down the law, all her specific demanding rules for the house. It's clearly a power imbalance, employer-employee. But is there maybe a hint of something else there too, a shared understanding? Even then.
I think you can read it that way, absolutely. Vera is definitely establishing her authority, making it clear who's boss.
No question about that.
But you could also see it as her pesting Dolores, gauging her strength, her resilience. Is this woman going to crumble under pressure, or can she handle it?
Even if she has backbone.
Yeah. And beyond just the employer-employee thing, Francis suggests there might be this undercurrent, even then, of a shared understanding of the challenges women face. Vera's rules, though they seem dictatorial, are also about her maintaining control over her own life, her own domain. Control she likely had to fight hard to achieve and maintain.
So her demanding nature is also a survival tactic, her form of high-riding bitchiness.
You could definitely argue that. Francis suggests Vera, having navigated her own path as a woman of means in a patriarchal world, might recognize a certain kind of strength, a certain resilience in Dolores, even if it manifests differently due to their class positions.
Interesting.
So her demanding nature isn't just exercising class privilege, though it is that too. It might also be her way of ensuring her own autonomy in a system that constantly tries to undermine women's authority, no matter their wealth. So yeah, that initial power imbalance doesn't necessarily rule out a later, more complex understanding developing between them based on navigating similar patriarchal forces, just from very different starting points.
And this leads to another really interesting point Francis makes about the ending. Vera leaves her entire estate to Dolores. Francis doesn't see this as just, a sudden act of charity or kindness. He calls it a material act of sisterhood, rooted in that shared understanding. What does he mean by that?
Exactly. Francis argues it's not sentimental. It's not Vera suddenly getting soft in her old age.
No deathbed conversion.
No. It's a recognition of Dolores's decades of unwavering, difficult service, a recognition of the immense hardships Dolores endured, especially with Joe, and maybe, just maybe, a kind of unspoken, tacit acknowledgement of Dolores's role in dealing with the Joe problem.
Right. The elephant in the room.
The elephant in the well, maybe. So leaving the money is a material transfer of power. It might be small in the grand scheme of things, but it's significant. Power moving from one woman who survived patriarchy using wealth to another who survived using sheer grit and resilience.
Acknowledging the shared struggle materially.
Yes. A silent nod to their shared experiences as women trapped in this patriarchal, classist society. A final, concrete act of solidarity that goes beyond words. Frances really stresses that this elevates their relationship beyond just employer-employee. It recognizes this deeper bond forged through shared adversity, this mutual, unspoken understanding of what it takes to survive as a woman in their world.
Vera is recognizing Dolores' strength.
And maybe her own limitations, too, within those structures.
Yeah.
By leaving Dolores the money, she's giving her not just financial security, but symbolically, she's passing on a form of power, however limited, to a woman who absolutely earned it through years of labor and resilience against systemic oppression. This material sisterhood, as Frances calls it, really underlines the complex ways women can connect across class lines, especially when they recognize the common patriarchal forces shaping their lives.
Oh, okay. Now, we absolutely have to talk about the acting, because it's phenomenal.
Across the board.
David Hassan just raves about the whole cast, but he zeroes in on Kathy Bates as Dolores. He says, if you thought she was good in Misery.
Which she obviously was. She won the Oscar.
Right. But he says her work here is even better. And like we mentioned, IMDb and her own interview confirm Bates considers this her favorite role ever. What is it about her performance that makes it so incredibly powerful?
Oh, it's a true tour de force. Kathy Bates just becomes Dolores Claiborne. She embodies everything, the strength, the deep weariness, that fierce protective instinct, and all the scars, visible and invisible, from her past.
You feel the history in her body language.
Completely. And she talks about this in the interview. The preparation was immense. Playing Dolores at 2 different ages, 55 and 35. That meant changes in makeup, wigs, how she moved, how she spoke. She even got a dental bridge made for the older Dolores to physically show the wear and tear of that life.
Wow, that's commitment.
That's real commitment. Her portrayal is so raw, so authentic. She gives you the full emotional and physical toll of decades of hard labor and horrific abuse, but never, ever tips into caricature or melodrama. It's so grounded.
You just believe her every second.
Every second. You feel her resilience, that unwavering love for Selena underneath all the hardness, and that simmering rage that's always just below the surface. It's just masterful. It holds the whole film together.
Musson praises how much she conveys with just a look.
Yeah, the subtlety, a simple look, a gesture, the depth and nuance are incredible. And the main accent, her whole physicality, it just grounds Dolores so firmly in her working class reality. Her commitment just shines through in every frame. It makes Dolores unforgettable, truly an iconic character.
And the fact she loves the role says so much.
It really does. It speaks to her connection to Dolores, the importance of telling that story. It's not just acting. It feels like she's embodying the struggle and the strength of so many working class women who face that kind of hardship.
And then there's Jennifer Jason Leigh as Selena. Equally compelling, right?
Yeah.
Musson calls her performance equally wonderful, capturing that dark, distant, cynical, bitter, broken energy he described. How does her performance work alongside Bates's?
Leigh is the absolute perfect counterpoint. She nails that emotional damage, all those defensive layers Selena has constructed over years of trauma and just being away from her mother and that life.
Her initial suspicion feels so real.
Totally believable. That hostility towards Dolores initially, it feels completely rooted in those repressed memories and the story she's told herself to cope with her past. But then, as Selena starts to uncover the truth, Leigh shows that shift so subtly. You see the understanding slowly dawning, the cynicism gradually chipping away. It's a fantastic arc.
And the chemistry between them is key.
Oh, it's crucial. That complex, incredibly strained mother-daughter relationship. The chemistry between Bates and Leigh makes it absolutely riveting. It's portrayed with such incredible nuance.
Musson mentions her physicality and voice conveying that inner turmoil.
Yeah, her initial resistance to confronting the past, her guardedness, Leigh uses everything, and her transformation from that detached, cynical journalist back into a daughter who finally understands and embraces her mother. It's just a testament to her skill.
Their dynamic is the heart of the film.
It really is. Both performances are incredibly powerful on their own, but together in their scenes, they just crackle with all that unspoken history and complex emotion. It's deeply resonant.
And we can't forget the supporting cast. Musson highlights Christopher Plummer as Detective Mackey, bringing that cat and mouse element. Judy Parfitt's fantastic Vera. David Strathairn being brilliant as the truly horrible Joe St. George. And hey, even a young John C. Reilly. How do they all contribute?
Yeah, the supporting cast is just top-notch. Plummer as Mackey gives you that constant pressure, that suspicion that keeps you guessing about Dolores. He keeps the procedural element taut.
Is he going to get her?
Right. Parfit's Vera, she's imperious, yes, but also has that strange insightfulness, and she delivers those key lines, like the bitch line Ebert also noted, with such unforgettable gravitas.
Perfect delivery.
Perfect. And Strathairn, wow, his Joe is just chillingly effective. He makes you understand why Dolores did what she did. He embodies that patriarchal cruelty so believably.
He makes the character monstrous without being cartoonish, like you said earlier.
Exactly. And yeah, John C. Reilly, in that smaller role as the constable, he brings that grounded presence he always has. Every one of these performances adds another layer, enriches the whole story, makes the world feel real.
Musson said Plummer kept Mackie from being silly.
Right.
Still a threat.
Yeah, he avoided caricature. Mackie feels intelligent, calculated in his pursuit. Parfit captures Vera's sharp wit, but also hints at an underlying vulnerability. The strength of the entire supporting cast just elevates the film way beyond a simple thriller. It creates this rich, believable world for Dolores and Selina's story to unfold in. Even the smaller parts add to that atmosphere of Little Tall Island, that complex web of small-town relationships.
Okay, beyond the acting, let's talk about the filmmaking itself. Musson praises the savvy use of color, those bright, bold colors for the past, contrasting with the desaturated grays of the present. Ebert highlighted Taylor Hackford's direction, how well he handled the flashback structure, and the effective screenplay by Tony Gilroy and Stephen King. How did these technical choices really boost the film's themes?
Oh, they're absolutely crucial. They do so much heavy lifting in conveying the film's emotional weight and its core ideas. That contrast in color palettes you mentioned, it visually separates the past, which was vibrant, yes, but also incredibly painful, from the bleak, gray, uncertain present.
Reinforces how the past haunts the present.
Exactly. It makes it tangible. And Hackford's handling of the flashbacks, as Ebert noted, is really skillful. It lets the story unfold non-linearly, peeling back layers of truth gradually, building suspense not just about events, but about character and motivation.
You piece it together with Selina.
You do. It creates that sense of discovery for the audience. And the screenplay, adapting King's novel, it crafts such compelling dialogue. Those memorable lines, especially between Dolores and Vera, they just resonate perfectly with the film's exploration of survival, class, female resilience.
And the cinematography generally. IMDb user reviews mention stunning period photography.
Yeah, the visual artistry really contributes to the whole atmosphere. Those desaturated grays in the present reflect Dolores's emotional state, right? Drained, oppressed by the current accusations, while the brighter, sometimes harsher colors of the past highlight both the brief joys and the intense hardships of her younger life.
The structure pulls you in?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It makes you an active participant in uncovering the truth, leading to that deeper understanding of why Dolores is the way she is. And the dialogue, it's sharp, often darkly witty, especially Vera's lines. It adds complexity to the relationships and the themes.
It's also interesting to touch on the connections to other Stephen King stuff and some of the trivia. We mentioned Kathy Bates obviously being in Misery and having a small part in The Stand. Jennifer Jason Leigh turning up later in Lee's story.
Right, the King Alumni Network.
And Bob Gunton, the warden from Shawshank, as the bank manager here. And Dolores actually mentions Shawshank in the film.
She does. Husbands die every day, Dolores. Why? One is probably dying right now while you're sitting here waiting. They just seem to wither up and drift away. And then the Shawshank line. It's a great little nod.
Plus, Masson notes that Castle Rock Entertainment made this, and they also did Shawshank and Misery.
Yeah, there was a real synergy there in the 90s with those grounded King adaptations.
And just for fun, the IMDb goof, the full moon shone the night before the total solar eclipse. Astronomically impossible.
Huh. Gotta love those little details. Artistic license, right?
Exactly. It all adds to the film's unique place, doesn't it, within that whole King cinematic universe.
It does. Those connections offer nice context for fans. Bates working with King material again shows her affinity for his strong, complex female characters. The Shawshank link with Gunton in the line subtly connects these two non-supernatural King films that both deal with injustice and survival. Masson also points out thematic links. King often explores the darkness within small towns, the human monsters, the recurring actors, Castle Rock. It solidifies that interconnectedness. These details might not be central to our Marxist feminist reading.
No, but they're interesting context.
Exactly. They add to the appreciation of the film within that broader King legacy. And the Shawshank reference, given its themes of wrongful accusation and institutional injustice, adds a nice little layer of intertextuality if you catch it.
Okay, so let's bring it all back home. Back to Francis's Marxist feminist interpretation. Can we sort of summarize the key takeaways? What does the film ultimately show us about the struggles of working class women viewed through this lens.
Absolutely. I think the main takeaway, looking through Frances's lens, is how powerfully the film depicts the multiple layers of oppression faced by working class women like Dolores.
It's not just one thing.
No, it's intersectional, right? We
Yeah.
see her battling patriarchal violence directly through her abusive husband, Joe. And simultaneously, she's facing economic exploitation. Her labor for Vera is undervalued, her own savings are stolen, leaving her financially vulnerable and trapped. And her acts of resistance, crucially, including the killing of Joe, frames these not as simple crimes, but as desperate, almost logical responses to complete systemic failure. They become acts of survival in a world that gave her no other viable options.
A fight for her life and her daughter's life.
Exactly. The film also critiques respectability politics, doesn't it? Through Selina's initial shame and disdain for her mother, contrasting with her eventual recognition of Dolores' incredible strength and sacrifice.
Right. Judging her mother by middle-class standards initially.
Yeah. Ultimately, Dolores Claiborne really hammers home that idea that the personal is profoundly political. It shows how working class women's lives are fundamentally shaped by these intersecting forces of class and gender. Frances really emphasizes that Dolores' story isn't unique or isolated.
It represents a broader reality.
It reflects the systemic inequalities faced by countless working class women under capitalism and patriarchy. His analysis positions the film as this powerful indictment of those systems, but also a celebration of the resilience, the resistance of women who were so often pushed to the margins and silenced.
And the bitch line becomes...
It becomes a symbol of that defiance,
Yes.
right? A necessary tool for survival against those oppressive forces when all the official channels fail you. And Selina's journey towards understanding her mother underscores the importance of challenging our own class biases and patriarchal assumptions.
So, final thoughts then. What about the film's lasting power, its relevance today? Ebert noted it lacks the supernatural horror typical of King, but does that diminish its impact or enhance it?
I'd argue it enhances it. Dolores Claiborne remains so potent, so relevant, precisely because its horror is grounded in real lived experiences. Experiences of women facing patriarchal violence, economic hardship. These things haven't gone away, have they?
Sadly, no.
Its deep dive into class dynamics, the invisibility of domestic labor, those incredibly complex mother-daughter bonds, it all continues to resonate so deeply, and the film doesn't offer easy answers, does it?
No tidy resolutions.
No. Frances points this out, too. It refuses sentimentality. It forces you, the viewer, to confront really uncomfortable truths about power, about survival, about the brutal choices people, especially women in oppressive situations, are sometimes forced to make.
Even without ghosts, it's deeply unsettling.
Deeply unsettling and profoundly thought-provoking. Ebert was right. The film's power is in its characters, their intense humanity, and that transcends genre. The themes, domestic abuse, economic inequality, mother-daughter relationships, they remain painfully pertinent today, which makes the film's exploration feel just as urgent now as it did in 1995.
And its focus on female strength and resilience.
Offers a powerful message that still hits home.
Well said. Okay, on that revolutionary note, Francis, in his article, gave the film a hammer and sickle rating of 5 out of 5 for its class consciousness, its feminist materialism, its whole revolutionary spirit.
Perfect score.
And you know what? We wholeheartedly concur. Hammer and sickle rating, 5 out of 5.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
All right, comrades, that's about all the revolutionary cinema analysis we have time for today.
Until next time, keep watching critically.
This is Marxists at the Movies.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low.
Thank you for listening to the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Cinema whispers
Don't forget to
where
like and
truths can
comment.
grow. From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Tonight, Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name. Popcorn power and the working class dream. Each flickers with a revolutionary beam. The heroes rise from the factory floor, challenging the scripts and demanding more. Blockbusters topple in an epic embrace.